Launch is currently scheduled for 12 hours, 37 minutes, and 1 second Universal Time, or 5 hours, 37 minutes, 01 seconds AM Pacific Daylight Savings Time. I'm John Isbrucker, Falcon 9 Principal Integration Engineer, and I'll be bringing you coverage of the SpaceX launch for the Iridium Next satellites during the webcast. Now, this is our third of 8 planned launches for Iridium, followed with a second one on June 25th. Today's mission represents our 15th Falcon 9 launch of the year. Today's launch is from historic Space Launch Complex 4 at Vandenberg Air Force Base, our West Coast launch site. You can see illuminated in the pre-dawn darkness the two-stage Falcon 9 vehicle. It stands 70 meters tall. That's taller than a 20-story building. Now, the first stage of the Falcon 9 will provide the initial force to get out of the majority of the Earth's atmosphere. Today's flight will feature stage separation at about 66 kilometers altitude. If you look closely, you can see the first stage is the part of the vehicle that has the SpaceX logo on it. The first stage today will be returning to our drone ship named Just Read the Instructions. It'll take 3 burns of the first stage to get back to the drone ship, which will be located about 300 kilometers downrange of the launch pad in the Pacific Ocean. On top of the first stage is the second stage. That'll take the satellites from the edge of space and accelerate them to orbital speeds of just over 7.5 kilometers per second, 10 times faster than a bullet. Finally, on top of the vehicle is the 17-foot diameter payload fairing, inside of which are the 10 Iridium Next satellites. Now, you can see structure next to the Falcon 9. That's our transporter erector. There's 2 major parts of a transporter erector. First is the launch mount, the platform at the bottom that the rocket sets upon, and it provides connections into the first stage. On the side of the Falcon 9, you can see the strongback. That's the vertical tower. It provides connections to the second stage and the spacecraft. Now, these connections are umbilicals that carry power, propellant, gases, electrical commands, and vehicle telemetry. Finally, one reminder about the transporter erector. It will recline before launch to a position of 77.5 degrees. That's different than our 39A launches on the East Coast, where the erector reclines after Falcon 9 lifts off. We're at T-minus 11.5 minutes, continuing to count down, looking for an on-time launch this morning. Everything on the Falcon 9 continues to look good right now. The Falcon 9 team working no significant issues or problems. We rolled out on the evening of the 7th. We went vertical. Checkouts have done well, and we are currently in the middle of the propellant loading sequence. We began loading fuel at T-minus 70 minutes. Fuel is now loaded on the second stage, and we are complete with fuel loading on the first stage, except for a small amount of topping off that we'll do in the last 7 minutes or so of the countdown. The major activity going on right now is liquid oxygen loading. That's in progress on both the first and the second stages, and that'll continue down to the last 3 to 2 minutes of the countdown. Our next major activities that we're going to see are the opening is the retraction of the strongback. Then inside of 1 minute we'll be opening starting the flight computer, counting us down for igniting the Merlin engines right before T0, and then release at T0. You may notice in a close-up the white grid fins. These are the aluminum grid fins. We're using those today instead of the dark titanium because this is a return from a trajectory that is less extreme than a geostationary transfer launch, and that allows us to use the aluminum grid fins. On the spacecraft side, the Iridium team has gone to internal power. They're working, no issues. Everything's looking good for the 10 satellites. For the range, we're operating out of Vandenberg. The Western Range is providing us similar support, airspace clearance, sea clearance, as we use for the Eastern Range launches. And finally this morning, the weather looks excellent. It's calm at ground level. Upper altitude winds a little bit high, but they're also within acceptable limits. So everything's looking good. Falcon 9, the Iridium satellites, the range, and the weather for an on-time launch in just over 9.5 minutes from now. T-minus 9 minutes, 15 seconds and counting. Everything looks good right now at Vandenberg at Slick 4. Today, SpaceX is launching 10 Iridium Next satellites to low Earth orbit. This is our third of 8 planned launches for our customer. Now, in order to correctly position the satellites, the SpaceX team has to launch right on time. So that means this morning our launch window is 1 second long. We do have a backup opportunity tomorrow if we had to scrub today. The Falcon 9 spacecraft, or second stage, will actually send the commands once we get into the proper orbit of 625 kilometers altitude. Those commands will individually release the Iridium satellites one at a time. Every 100 seconds we should get a satellite release, and that whole sequence will take 15 minutes, and we're going to try to bring it to you later on in the webcast. From there, the satellites will maneuver to their final orbit slightly higher from where we drop them off. Here's Matt Desch of Iridium with more on the Iridium system. Since we last talked with you, the strongback has begun reclining away from the Falcon 9 at Slick 4 at Vandenberg. Next major activities we're going to get into, about 3 minutes before launch, we'll begin securing liquid oxygen loading on the first stage. 2 minutes to go before launch, the second stage will complete. At T-minus 1 minute, the flight computers will go into startup and they'll take over the sequence leading to liftoff on the Falcon 9. A couple of words of warning. We've been loading helium into the second stage. The final go, no-go call for that would come just about 1 minute before launch, so we'll be listening in case we have not got enough helium on board. Another warning, at about T-minus 90 seconds, we begin venting the gaseous oxygen out of the ground side of that strongback. You might see a large white cloud coming off of the strongback. That's normal, nothing to be worried about. The Iridium satellites are ready to go. The range is ready to support. We've been looking at cruise ship, but they're not an issue this morning, and the weather looks good. We've heard stage 1 locks closeout complete. We're coming up on the 2-minute mark, so let's listen in to the terminal countdown of Falcon 9 with Iridium Mission 3.
ROC, this is RC on countdown 1. Can you confirm that the range is green?
Rock and work.
Falcon 9 is on internal power. Stage 2 lock secured.
Rock range is green.
Vehicles in self-align. Stage 1, Stage 2 paradigm secured.
AFTS is ready for launch.
Falcon 9's in startup. Stage 2, the startup pressures.
LD go for launch.
30. 20,
Stage 1 is at liftoff pressures.
15,
Falcon 9's configured for flight.
10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Liftoff. Falcon 9. GC moving to propulsion and operations to secure the pad on the pad editing.
GC copies. Wilco.
T plus 1 minute and 17 seconds into flight, Falcon 9 approaching max Q. You've heard the call out, MVAC-D chilling. We're now getting the second stage engine ready for ignition. Several activities coming up here very shortly. At T plus 2 minutes and 24 seconds, we expect main engine cutoff, followed immediately by stage separation and ignition of the upper stage engine. Right after that, the first stage will begin the first of 3 burns to return us back to the Pacific Ocean to the drone ship parked offshore about 300 kilometers downrange. Coming up on MECO.
Position signal box.
We have MECO. We have back ignition.
T plus 2 minutes and 47 seconds into flight. We've had successful stage separation and ignition of the upper stage engine. And as you can see, we've also relit 3 of the engines on the first stage to begin the sequence that will return it to the drone ship in the Pacific Ocean. Boost back burn lasts about 30 seconds. And we have fairing separation. Had a brief view of the Iridium satellites as the fairing separated. Again, it's just before dawn as we head south over the Pacific Ocean, so we're not getting any sunlight. First stage boost back burn did complete. Fairing did successfully separate. We're waiting to hear the drone ship AOS, that's acquisition of signal. That indicates the drone ship is receiving telemetry from the first stage. Second stage propulsion continues to look nominal, coming up at T plus 4 minutes into flight. T plus 5 minutes into the flight of Falcon 9 carrying 10 Iridium Next satellites. Next event in our timeline is in about 35 seconds. That'll be a second ignition of the Falcon 9 first stage, what we call the entry burn. This is a burn of 3 Merlin 1D engines that'll slow us down for the actual re-entry into the Earth's atmosphere. The burn itself will last about 13 seconds. Meanwhile, second stage, performance continues to look good, the trajectory is good, engine parameters look good.
Stage 1 entry startup.
And you see the flare on the screen. We have startup. It looks like all 3 engines are up and running. Also, you can see silhouetted the grid fins did deploy earlier. They'll now be used to guide us as we enter the Earth's atmosphere. And we've had shutdown of the entry burn.
Stage 1 AFTS has nuked.
The automated flight termination system, autonomous flight termination system has safed on the first stage. We're coming up on T plus 7 minutes. Stage 1 is headed back to the drone ship in the Pacific Ocean. Stage 2 still headed to its initial parking orbit. Shutdown of the second stage engine should be just over T plus 9 minutes into
Large
flight.
AOS.
Now we're getting ready for the landing burn of the first stage.
Landing burn start. Stage 1 landing successful.
Delta LS.
7.5 minutes into flight. You can hear from the applause. We lost the signal briefly, then it returned with the view of the first stage in that pre-dawn darkness, sitting on top of Just Read the Instructions. Out in the Pacific Ocean, a successful landing of the first stage. Meanwhile, the primary mission continuing, the second stage, 7 minutes and 54 seconds into flight, a little more than a minute left to go. Propulsion continues to look good on the second stage engine as we power to the low Earth parking orbit carrying the 10 Iridium Next satellites.
Elciane. Zooming in on this fire here.
Stage 2 AFTS has saved.
T plus 8 minutes and 38 seconds into flight. We've heard the autonomous flight termination system has been safed on the second stage call. Second stage just about to go into Earth orbit.
Yes, Eco.
Call out of SECO. Second stage engine cutoff. We're waiting right now for a call out from guidance, nav, and control. They're looking at the orbit of the second stage. Right now it looks at the telemetry we're getting. It looks like we've got a good orbit. This is the parking orbit of the second stage. This is the first of 2 orbits we're headed to today. Looks like we've got a good one here. What's going to happen now is we're entering a coast phase. You might have heard coast phase entry call out just a moment ago. We're going to coast about halfway around the Earth, passing over the Antarctica Peninsula, come up over Africa. We'll relight the second stage engine very briefly, That'll get us into the final orbit from which we'll deploy the 10 Iridium Next satellites. All of that's going to happen at about T plus 52 minutes. So right now, we're just past T plus 10 minutes into flight. We've had a good first stage landing after a great countdown and a liftoff. Second stage performance looked very good getting into low Earth orbit. And so we're now going to go through about a 41-minute coast period. So we're going to leave you an animation showing where the second stage of the Falcon 9 is as we're passing over various features on the Earth. We will resume live coverage of the upper stage mission and the separation of the Iridium Next satellites